Assalamualaikum to Dr. AIZUDDIN, my lecturer in ADS660 Seminar in Global Affairs. We are from Group A, represent the Arab Spring.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Muhammad FAKHRULRADZI bin Muhammad NIZAM.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is NURELLYA binti NGADIMAN at number student 2019713333.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh for everyone. My name is Nurullia binti HAIRODIN. My matric number is 2019591515.
My name is SYAQIRAH ANISHA binti NORASLI with matric number 2019579011.
As for introduction, Arab Spring is an uprising, protest, revolt, civil rebellion and revolution movement by the society in Arab countries, especially in Middle East and North Africa. It was started in late of 2010, which is in December 18, and the peak of the protest is in 2011. The protests are purposed to against both nation authoritarian leaders and non-authoritarian leaders that due to show their dissatisfaction and frustration. The way they show their dissatisfaction and frustration by doing strike, march, rallies and demonstration at the public place and mobilize the movement through the social media. Initially, the movement was started in Tunisia, then the movement quickly spread to the Arab countries in Middle East and North Africa. Actors involved in Arab Spring, even though there are many actors that involved, but there are three main actors that involved in early of Arab Spring, which first is Muhammad Bouazizi, the Tunisian man who initiated revolt in Tunisia on December 2010 by burning himself to show dissatisfaction after the authorities in Tunisia misuse his power towards him. Besides, it is also to show dissatisfaction towards Ben Ali's regime due to the high corruption, unemployment and high rate of poverty, especially in the southern of Tunisia. And this incident was the starting point of the Arab Spring movement in the Middle East and the North Africa. Second is Muslim Brotherhood. It is the most influential Islamist organization in Middle East that mobilized many social moves. The statist Islamism ideology as the factor of this organization influenced many people in Arab countries. The organization also support the anti-Mubarak movement that was started by the youth generation in Egypt to protest the Mubarak authoritarian throughout his 30 years. As the impact, it caused the president step down from his position and catalyzed the movement of Arab Spring towards the other Arab countries in Middle East and North Africa. Third is another political party. It is the Islamist political party in Tunisia that inspired from Muslim Brotherhood. The political party create a mutual collaboration with the secular party in the Tunisia in order to oppose the dictatorship of Ben Ali. Besides, it is also enhance the tenacity of the civil society to oppose the regime. Besides, the incident of Muhammad Bouazizi catalyzed the movement of the party in bring down of the regime and become the one of the actors that mobilized the movement Arab Spring towards the Arab countries.
I would like to continue on cases of Arab Spring. The first one is Tunisia. On 17 December 2019, this small North Africa got the world attention when a young man named Muhammad al-Bouzizi burned himself on fire due to stress after his small business car was taken by local authority. This event inspired the uprising of the Tunisian people who have long been held captive for a lifetime by the tyranny of Zainal Abidin bin Ali, who ruled Tunisia with an iron grip for 23 years. After weeks of peaceful protests, Zainal Abidin bin Ali finally resigned and went to the Saudi Arabia. Tunisia politics is relatively stable today under the leadership of President Kais Saied, a former Islamic-minded academic who is smart enough in dealing with internal politics that is still heavily influenced by international politics. Until this day, Tunisia is still meant not to have any cooperation with the illegal state of Israel. Next is Yemen. Yemen is the poorest country now mired in civil war and war with a protected coalition of surrounding countries and has killed tens of thousands of people and left millions people on the brink of starvation. Apart from showing how the leaders of Islamic countries are not an example and even ready to be manipulated by external power, this war is very embarrassing for all Muslims. The killing of fellow Muslims is more serious than the killing of Muslims by a outsider. Next is Libya. In Libya, the people uprising that began in the city of Benghazi, Eastern Libya, then spread to the city of Sirte as far as the Libyan capital Tripoli. However, the situation was not same as in the Tunisia. The uprising was handled by violence. Muammar Gaddafi triggered a civil war between his army and the people who revolted against him. And 9-month war killed thousands of Libyans and more lost their home and ran to Libya. Finally, on 20 October 2011, the country totally fell and Muammar Gaddafi was killed by his own people. After the fall of Muammar Gaddafi regime, the situation in Libya got worse. Lastly is Syria. According to report, the Syrian uprising has already begun. When activities testing the water from their own store received protests on 26 January 2011. Several protests supporting the Libyan and Egyptian revolution were recommended throughout February. President Bashar al-Assad promised reform, but it has been thwarted in a few ways. The Syrian fire barrage continues when activities smuggling others out of the country. The protests are said to have started in March in Daraa, the southmost city of the country.
First, the factor of Arab Spring issue in the role of Iran. Iran have made theoretical flow within the east center of North Africa, which is the MENA, where major political advancements take place at the theoretical level instead of the single-state level. Oil has implied a principal impact or relationship between Middle Easterners, primarily because of the argument between all destitute and all wealthy nations. In theoretical relation, oil-poor nations very frequently or expressly state claims on the share of oil rents that are never really acknowledged by oil-rich nations as genuine. Nazi philosophy was basically not thought of as a device to annihilates the oil governments and state control over their oil rich, but it was before long respected by these rules as pointed accurately and as a result, in other words, usually the event of this disappointment among the Middle Eastern toward the loss of oil to the exterior world. The second factor is elite fragmentation. In February 2011, Bahrain likely had the most elevated extent of uncomfortability as a portion of the citizenship populace of any Middle Eastern nation. This has been the case since 1956, where the pioneers of the cross-partition chain development and top official committee were captured and banished, and numerous more were detained domestically. Besides the rising to the positions of royal of ruler Hamid, Minister Isa al-Khalifa driven to commit absolutions for political detainees and banishes and restricted political changes. The control battle proceeded after the quick reactions to the Middle East Spring, where authority change and administration were held responsible. Cultural opportunities opened all through the Middle East war. Eventually, it brought in a debate between the unifications of control by default elites and developing both styles of popular government in numerous Muslim large part states. Starting trust that this prevalence development will conclusion debasement, increment political interest, and bring more noteworthy financial value rapidly collapsed after taking after counter-revolutionary measure by remote performing artists in Yemen, theoretical and worldwide military interventions in Bahrain and Yemen. Next is the factor of social media. Social media is the one way of the government is attempting to smother dissent. In numerous nations, government close certain destinations of peace where benefit totally, particularly in times sometimes recently harsh energies. The government moreover denounced substance maker of committing disconnected wrongdoing or closing communication on certain destinations or branches such as Facebook. Within the new social media has been thought as the driving constraint behind the quick spread of the transformations around the world when modern challenges developed in reactions to share victory story that those happening in other countries. Next is the factor of unemployment. The Arab world excludes the long story of the battle of political order from liberal branches to Islamic radical. But the challenges that started in 2012 are impossible to create into a genetic marvel if not for about disappointment and unemployment to more living guidelines. The outrage of a university graduate constrained them to drive taxes of hard life, and families battling to supply for their children overcome ideological divisions. Unemployment is not a big issue not only for the Arab Spring but also in Malaysia. So in this situation, the status of unemployment in all the countries will increase.
So I will explain about the implication of Arab Spring. First is US-Israel relationship. We know that Israel and US have had a close and special relationship since a long time ago. The relationship for this two-way relationship started in 1967 during the post-Cold War. The relationship is still ongoing, and US and Israel have their own importance on their economy, which they provided their need among these two nations. First, US and Israel share their influence in Middle East Coast, which they hold back Tehran in their nuclear program, support regimes like Jordan, and oppose to Islamic terrorism. However, the Arab Spring has shown the US which affect the relationship with two allies by US respond and showing their strategic importance to the Arab Spring. Pro-Western and semi-secular have reached their end when Washington led the Arab Spring Revolution with different opinion. Washington wants to focus on the issue on the Pacific and China. Besides, Washington took heed of the crisis in Afghanistan and Iraq, which made Washington use a new strategy. Besides, President Obama, as we know, the president is slightly less activist for the Islamic movement and Muslim Brotherhood. Second is Islamic revival. The United States, US, has limitation of power to the Middle East. The Arab Spring has affected the US economies in terms of resources. The US focused on China, whereas the US made huge investment in China instead in the Middle East, Europe, and US have less investment to do so. Next, after Tunisia had election in Libya and Egypt, there are some changes. There were Islamic revival happens in Islamic parties in the elections. Another has a medium level win in the elections. Another is the one of the parties that have eagerly won in this election. The Democratic of Arab government will make the government free from US power. The Arab Spring has fueled Israel fears that the relatively stable lands have transferred to them in recent decades. Next is solution for Arab Springs. First is bringing up MENA's economy for youth. MENA stands for Middle East and North Africa. In MENA, there were failures in civil war, violence, and political opportunities. For fighting in the Arab Spring, the government must start the youth in terms of providing jobs or support in terms of financial as well. In MENA, countries are open for the political system and free right for peace. However, there will be change in the government economy. MENA countries are going through the public debt, but instead in the Gulf, these regions have improvement in business especially. MENA's government must redefine the social contract following the way of the Arab Spring. Other than that, MENA's youth also can open markets for the private sector by making the government a fair regulator. By this, the way must have accountability, transparency that need to be put into the state. Second solution is the equality of Arab citizenship. The equality idea of equal citizenship is the solution to overcome the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring protests may have been driven by wealth inequalities, which are often higher than economic inequality. So, the equality of the citizenship can be improved also in terms of the land, unity of the Arab people, regulation, right of freedom, and fundamentals. This effort also can be used in a way of progressive and calm approach to achieve the reform agenda. Besides, the reformation needs also can be made stage by stage, then use the radical approach which can fit to the slow problem solving. This is because the weak point in the Arab Spring is power or rule by the regime. The Arabs have been monopolized by the authoritarian, which they rule the will of the nation. The Arab world's fundamental flaw is that he has been unable to develop its own comprehensive intellectual, cultural, and pragmatic enterprise capable of understanding the future language until now.
As a conclusion, Arab Spring events show the negative impact of the authoritarian leadership and lack of democracy in a government. It is because it influenced the emotion of civil society to dissatisfaction and frustration. Besides, it is also lead to the protest and uprising activity in order to reform or urge the government to enhance accountability and transparency. However, even though this political movement seems successful in earlier, but it contributes to the other issue in the countries involved. Furthermore, the movement Arab Spring in some countries in the countries that involved are still ongoing after the 10 years. Thus, event Arab Spring is one of the tragic events that was happened in humanitarian history. Due to the violence from the regime, high number of people were killed and displaced.